Hello and welcome to the Changer Chat. I'm Courtney Govero, filling in for Grant Venable today because Grant is joining us as an interviewee alongside with Al Rolfing. As many of you know, Grant serves as the director of Be the Change Volunteers, where he coordinates and leads teams worldwide to provide education opportunities in deserving communities. We asked Al, or Uncle Al, as he's affectionately known by everyone at BCTV, to join us. Uncle Al has volunteered and led many teams on projects in North America, South America, Africa, and Asia. Today, he and Grant will give us insights to something that only a few volunteers ever experience. That is the unique first visit to a potential new partner site, which includes the application, evaluation, and BCTV's project needs analysis. Uncle Al, for those listeners who haven't met you before, tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get connected with BCTV?
Thanks, Courtney. First of all, my wife and I live in Liberty, Missouri. We've operated a veterinary practice here for over 30 years. We both enjoy serving within the community, and that's where I actually first heard about Be the Change. I met Grant when he was a presenter at my local Sertoma Club, and being a big believer in education and the opportunities it can provide to change lives, I decided it was a good opportunity for me to sign up for a project and been volunteering on projects and evaluation trips ever since.
You know, in that description, I didn't hear you mention that you're an employee of BCTV.
No, I am not.
But you give a lot of time to Be the Change volunteers, and I understand that you pay for all your own travel and take time off of work. Usually this is driven by a pretty big why, going beyond just the I want a vacation someplace cool and had some cool pictures. So Al, what's your why?
Well, to be honest, it initially probably was just a way to travel, use my construction knowledge, and help others. Basically a win-win scenario. But after my first trips, my why quickly changed to the people and the opportunities that education can bring. It became more about watching the student hug a new library book, or seeing their smiles when receiving new pencils or a pad of paper, or hearing the laughter when a kid first goes down a slide for the first time. It's watching the teacher cry when she sits behind her very first desk in a bright new classroom. And it's the pride in a parent's voice as they tell you about their child's dream to become a teacher or an engineer or business person or even a doctor. Plus, it's all the friends I've made along the way. They are my BTCV family. I guess they all became my why.
That's really special, Al. That's really great. So would you take me back to your first trip with BCTV? Where did you go? What was it like? And of course, how did you become Uncle Al?
Well, my first project was to El Chino School in Peru in 2014. After 3 flights and a sleepless overnight in the Lima airport, we arrived in Iquitos, ready for a 4-hour Amazon riverboat ride. We took 2 boats from Iquitos. The first was filled mostly with volunteers, and the second slower boat was filled with supplies, tools, luggage, food, and 3 lucky volunteers, including Grant and myself.
That was a long trip.
Yeah. Remember, I said our boat was slower? Well, 4 hours turned into 5, which turned into 6, which almost hit 7 before the water spray from the boat tried to keep us cool, but it was no match for the hot midday sun. We all 3 needed extra sunscreen and deodorant on that day.
True story.
Our project was to build Classroom 1 on an elevated concrete foundation the local volunteers had built prior to us arriving. I thought that I had some construction knowledge going into the project, but I soon received an education in jungle construction. I watched the local village men head out into the jungle with machetes and return with fresh cut timbers, quickly peel away the bark, and up it went. Before long, the framework was up and we were ready for the roof. Roofing material was palm leaf shingles, hand-woven palm fronds that each family in the community made as their contribution to the project.
Wow.
It was quite an eye-opening education for this old boy who thought he knew about construction. And the Uncle Al started in Peru with the group of high school volunteers on that trip. With all volunteer teams, we get really close really fast. We work side by side during the day, and in the evenings we eat together, relax, and often play games. It's great fun and great memories. The high schoolers started calling me Uncle Al. Pretty soon the adults were calling me Uncle Al, and it just kind of stuck. And now with Grant's intros on our eval trips, I'm Uncle Al on 4 continents.
That's true.
That's fantastic. Well, after talking to you a few times, I can totally understand how you got the nickname Uncle Al. You've been wonderful, and your why just blows me away to listen to. It made me want to cry while I was listening. I'm like, keep it together. We got to get through this interview, Courtney. So it sounds like you just loved that trip and it inspired you to want to do more. Let's talk about the planning for these trips and what makes it so unique. To do that, I'm going to bring in Grant as well. For those of you who don't know, Grant is actually my baby brother. Now, if you've ever met Grant, he's giant, and so it's hard to call anyone Grant's size baby, but I certainly do. And I couldn't be more proud of him. We would have never guessed this is where he would have gotten to in life, but after working with him a few times, I'm just blown away by the work he does. Grant, for those listeners who don't know you as well as I know you, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Courtney, thank you so much for the kind intro and the kind words and for being a great big sister and helping out BTCV so much and for your generous support. So as the director of change, I run the day-to-day operations for Be the Change volunteers. And basically that means we accept all the applications and coordinate all the projects from my office, which happens to be in Arizona. So many of our volunteers are in Missouri where the organization was founded. But because we're a traveling organization, I'm able to be remote. So the whole remote office thing is pretty normal for me. My wife, Rachel, and I have 2 wonderful daughters also, Vivian and Eva. And so when I'm not doing BTCV, I am shuffling girls around in a minivan, which is quite different than some of the vehicles Uncle Al and I have been in.
He has 2 adorable girls. Grant, how does BCTV leadership decide which countries or projects you will work with?
So that is a great question. We are very word of mouth for applicant communities, and our application process has several stages. The needs analysis and the site evaluations that Uncle Al helps me with is actually part of that total process. And not every community that applies is approved. We're actually pretty strict, and it's a pretty rigorous process for groups to get through.
So you've mentioned before that you've had to evaluate the integrity of the applicants. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the most important things for donors to know. The site visit and looking at the application is really about the integrity. So if a project partner tells us, hey, we've got 200 students at this school, and then we get on site and we're only counting 20 students, we need to understand why that is. Or if a project partner tells us that a sack of cement costs, $15 and we keep finding them for $5, that could be a problem. Now, fortunately, by the time we get to a site evaluation, we don't typically run into that all the time. But I will say that a big part of our diligence is trying to evaluate those things and make sure that we're using a donor's money well. And then finally, we want to make sure that the local partner is truly connected to the community. That's a key need, because as community activists, we need to know that we're doing something for these kids and not for someone who's not actually connected to the community.
Very cool. Very cool. You mentioned also when you were first talking about a needs analysis for a project. Can you walk me a little bit through how you do a needs analysis for a project?
Yeah, absolutely. So after all the applications are done and what we call pre-approved by our board of directors, we fly over to where the project is, 2 evaluators typically, and then we conduct this on-site needs analysis at the project school or campus. Number one, the most thing we need to determine is the project sustainable? And then we want to know what are the underlying issues related to education, because it's not always a classroom or 4 walls and a roof. And that's really our goal, is to improve the education opportunities for students. And so typically someone might say, well, if I just had a building, then I could have a great school. But we know that great teachers actually make great schools. So that's one of the first things we want to find out is this project sustainable, and how are you going to pay those teachers? We tour the site, we look at all the buildings, and then something that Uncle Al is actually an expert at, because he's run a business for many years, is the interview process. And that's why he's so valuable to have with us. He's interviewed a lot of people for jobs, but what we're interviewing people for is we want to find out what is the real need here. What are the underlying issues related to education?
Cool. Uncle Al, Grant brought you up again. Can you tell me a little bit about your first site evaluation for a new project? What was it like getting to that location? And tell us everything, because I think we talk a little bit about culture shock when we go to places that I think people think culture shock, like these people speak another language. But you really do go to places where culture shock is a real thing based on the whole 5 senses of when you got off the plane.
Yeah, my first site eval was to the Gayaza School in Uganda in 2015. Grant and I were actually coming from Malawi, where we had just finished up a 2-week project, and we flew into Entebbe, Uganda. The totality of my Uganda history was based on Idi Amin and the movie Raid on Entebbe, hijacked plane and hostage rescue. So I was pretty clueless and maybe a little apprehensive. We walked out of the airport, and we were soon greeted by this teddy bear-like gentleman holding a BTCV placard with Grant's name on it. His smile and warm embrace, his cheerful welcome to Uganda greeting put us at ease as he introduced himself as the Reverend Cornelius, our host. On site, once we get there, we try to use what they call normal local transport. In Uganda, that meant basically a 5-hour public bus ride. Like you to, Grant nor I have ever been skinny or underweight, and this was a seating problem. Luckily, Grant had the foresight to purchase each of us an additional seat for the trip, and it gave us a tad more room.
Yes.
Changing the buses in the middle of the night was also a pretty challenging experience. Since we had just come from Malawi, we were carrying all of our luggage between the cramped market stalls in the middle of the night in pitch darkness. We were weaving in and out of all the people in the market, following this guy we had just met. He was dressed in all black. It was pitch dark, and we had no idea where we were going. We eventually made it to the next bus, and luckily we were on the road again, elbow to elbow, knees in our chest, with only 4 more hours of countless stops to Gayaza. We both agreed that neither one of us wanted to repeat that with a group of volunteers. No way, ever, ever again.
That's a really
my
evaluation, is just seeing what could a volunteer team get themselves into. So we were kind of the pigeons, right, Al? Pigeons.
We were thrown out there. Yeah. we were the guinea pigs.
Well, can you share this story about levitating the guy in the Kampala market? Or is that story top secret information that we can't share on the Changer Chat?
I don't think that one's top secret. We basically, like I said, we had all of our luggage, and we were stuffing that underneath our seats, and the bus driver wanted to make more room, so he was going to move our luggage. Well, Grant and I were both sitting in the back seat, and when this guy touched our luggage, Grant pretty much grabbed him by the nape of the neck and lifted him off the ground and said, "Don't ever touch it again." I think he didn't touch it anymore.
He was the bus driver.
Well, that is awesome. Those are some great stories and memories. Grant, did you have more to that story?
No, Al pretty well covered it. When we're on those site evaluations, you are kind of in a scenario where you're trying to figure out, what would a team be dealing with, but you're also watching your own stuff. The last thing that you want is for your bag to get walked off in a busy market. And then you got one pair of clothes for the rest of the trip. So, we're looking for, what do we need to be aware of? And typically, in most of the places we go, the people that you're with, they want to take care of you. They really do. What we found is that irregardless of where we go, they're going to watch out for you. But there are times when they can't watch out for you. And so we need to be wise, and we need to prepare our volunteers to be wise for those traveling moments.
There's those moments even in European countries that seem like not, places like you go to do these projects. So, Uncle Al, tell me how a site evaluation is different from volunteering with a team on a project.
Well, I really love doing both, but they are definitely quite different from each other. Site evaluations are often more fast-paced, a little more intense, because we're actually on the ground at the site for shorter periods of time. We are trying to evaluate the entire application and checking out all the options through our needs analysis, like Grant said, and making a game plan for all the logistics included if we decide to send a team. If you're actually traveling with a team of volunteers, all of the early planning and prep work for the project is done. As a volunteer, you basically get off your flight and you know and trust that your team leaders have a game plan for a successful and enjoyable next week.
Very cool. Now you participate in evaluation and needs analysis on the site. Tell me a little bit about validating the budget. Grant mentioned it a little bit earlier, but why is that so important when you're on these evaluation trips?
We try to verify as many prices as we can from the proposed budgets, including everything from food and lodging to transportation, and of course, the tools and building supplies. We try very, very hard to be good stewards of our donor dollars. Cement, for example, like Grant mentioned, we'll compare that price with multiple vendors throughout the market and price match it to what the applicant's proposed budget was. And as a donor, I know we are using each dollar wisely.
I like that Al brought up, even the food costs and hotel room costs. We'll look at different lodging and accommodation options for the teams. Some of the places we go, there are no hotels. And so we're not necessarily evaluating the hotel. We're evaluating where they believe we can have people sleep for a week or 2 weeks. And one of the questions sometimes we have to ask is, where are they going to use the restroom? Where are they going to clean up at the end of the day? How are we going to make this appropriate for travelers to stay? And we don't make any guarantees at BTCV that you'll be in a 5-star hotel. We have teams that travel and stay in the classrooms that we built the year prior. But what we do have to do is make sure that people have the appropriate accommodations to get the work done and to really have good cultural exchange on these projects. So we're evaluating all those things for the team experience as well.
Mm-hmm. And Al, I understand you make sure that the food is in order every time, because Grant's not very good at that.
That kind of is delegated to me to make sure the food is in order, and if we have vegetarians or vegans or any allergies, we try and really be on top of that.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. That must be really difficult when you're traveling to accommodate those types of things.
We try.
As a volunteer.
Well, Grant told me that your business experience has made you an expert interviewer. You talked a little bit about that when you talked about your why. What kind of questions do you ask parents and teachers, and what are you trying to understand from them?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I have interviewed my share of people over the years. BTCV has a process in place where we interview school administration, teachers, students, parents, community leaders, even down the skilled construction workers that we'll be working with. We ask a series of questions, 15 or 20 questions per person, making it a pretty long day. Some of the questions we ask of teachers is, how much are they paid per month? Who pays you? Is it always on time or is it late? How is your teacher attendance? How is your student attendance? Trying to just glean as much information as we possibly can. When we talk to the parents, we might ask them what they consider the biggest problem in the community. If it's jobs, we try to think outside the box, and maybe it might be vocational school activities or something that we can do that. Something always education-based solutions. One of the questions I always enjoy asking both teachers and students is, what do you need to make you a more successful teacher or student? I think it's really gives me a lot of insight to the individual needs and priorities with the answers I hear here from this question.
I love that question because it really goes to the heart of BCTV and how you're serving the communities that you're in. It's not just about building a building, but you're trying to find ways to make them successful. That's really cool. I really like that.
On the first site evaluation, another thing we do, even before we do those interviews, is we'll call what we describe as the PTA in. So the first day, they get a lot of notice that we're coming. They have several months of notice, and then we kind of keep sending reminders because a lot of these countries operate on what we call stretchable time, which means, be here at 3 p.m. doesn't necessarily mean 3 p.m. to everybody. They get there when their workday is done, and that's when it's time for the meeting. So requires a lot of patience on our end as action addicted Americans, but we'll call all the parents in, and we'll have a big group presentation where, we say, we know that, this person, your local community activist, has told you about Uncle Al and I coming, but these are the kinds of questions we're going to ask you, and we want you to not feel like that this is a test. It's not a test. It is a competitive process because there are other applicants and other schools that want this project, but we need really authentic answers to these questions so that we can help your students be successful. So we definitely have a section of this where it's group, meeting. We're meeting with a group of parents or a group of teachers. And sometimes we get feedback real quick from those.
So Grant, how many I should know this, it's not like we're not related, but I don't know actually how many site evaluations you've been on. I know you leave the country a lot, but how many?
I'm not sure I can put a number on it. I'll say many. I've been doing this for over a decade now, and most of that time has been with Be the Change volunteers. So what's most interesting is that as an organization, we've developed an expertise in evaluating these applications. And then we conduct this needs analysis process, and all of that evolves. It's all evolved over time. Initially, I think we had 5 questions. What do you need, and what's the best way to get money to you? And we just learned that we had to do better than that, and we're able to get better outcomes when we ask more questions. And that's a key point of difference from Be the Change volunteers and some other organizations. It's an investment to send 2 site evaluators to these projects, and it's also an investment to have these applications reviewed the way that we review them even before we send somebody. So because we do that, we can even see the trend in our annual reports that we're getting better numbers, we're getting better results because we take the time to do this. So let's say that a community does do one of our applications, and I'm tangenting a bit from your simple question of how many projects, but a community might apply for a project and not be approved. But if they go through our process, they're going to begin to find some of the solutions that they didn't know were there either. They're going to identify some of those underlying issues on their own and be able to solve those problems even without us.
I think that's good. You guys both have used 2 words that I love to listen and love to hear from a nonprofit organization. The word stewardship, Uncle Al brought that one up early, and Grant, you used the word sustainability several times. And when we first started talking about BCTV and you'd say sustainability, I thought it was like an eco-friendly word. You're kind of a hippie anyway. I was like, Grant's doing something like eco-friendly. But then as I've gotten to know BCTV and listen to you, I found out that sustainability is very different. Tell me a little bit about sustainability.
So sustainability can definitely be a buzzword in the nonprofit charity world. You hear everybody talk about sustainability, and we'll ask a simple question, early in the application process, when it's still on paper, how is your project sustainable? And we'll get a response back that says, well, we're going to get donations. We're going to get donations, and the donations are going to make us sustainable. And for the way BTCV would define sustainability, donations do not make you sustainable long-term. They might help you get off the ground towards a sustainable solution, but we want to know, how are you going to pay those teachers long-term at a school? Because if there's no teachers, there's no school. And if you say there's people in the United States, well, they're going to donate money for the next decade to pay those teachers. Well, it takes more than a decade to get a kid through a primary and secondary education. So what happens if they stop? What are you gonna have on site that makes you sustainable? Now, if we partner with the government school, in Peru, it's the Ministry of Education that we're actually partnered with, and the government pays the teachers. All right. But BTCV, in agreement, put the infrastructure in for the classrooms and the teacher housing that they bring those teachers into for the school term. So that's one example of sustainability. In India, it's a private mission school. And so they really had to have a business plan for sustainability. They had to explain to us how they were going to pay those teachers long term. And they've got a lot of local initiatives to do that. Inside of that, they also charge school fees to the students to attend. So the community is who really shows the sustainability for that school. If the school is going to grow, the community will demand it with their own dollars. And that investment makes the education all the more valuable for those students.
Very cool. Well, this question is really for both of you. I'm going to have Al and then Grant address it. So can you tell us about working with a local partner, specifically the leaders who acts as the point person for the community? You mentioned the community, and I really kind of want you guys to explore that a little bit with us. Talk to me a little bit about that, the partners.
The partners are very much an integral part of the long-term success of our projects. They participate pretty much in every phase, from the planning and the application process to greeting each team as we get on the ground. Each one has their own unique personality, but they're so essential in making a personal connection and the bond to each of the projects in each of the schools.
Grant?
Yeah, that community activist, just in so many ways, they're kind of the backbone of the project. In Peru, we have Dolly Beaver, who's Peruvian and connected to the community because she runs an ecotourism lodge near that school. She's very in tune and does a lot of those background communications with the community that we need to know what our next steps are. But there, you go over to Africa, where we have Reverend Cornelius was Reverend at the time. He's Bishop Cornelius now. And so we've known these guys a while, but he's a great example because he is actually from that community. He's from that village, and he's the most educated guy in that village. And he chose, instead of going out of the village to find a job, to stay in the village and kind of create a ripple effect, if you will, with his education. So they have different personality types. They all run at a different type of stretchable time, that's for sure. And so for us, that's kind of managing the cultural exchange aspect of it, though. They are really, really great to work with. It's really impressive to see someone's passion for their community in the way that our project partners have.
So BCTV, something I also found interesting as I got to know your organization, was they don't just do classrooms. In addition, they put in libraries, science labs, teachers. You've mentioned teachers housing a few times, which I never would have thought of. I do know about the playgrounds and the soccer fields and the school cafeterias, but it's really a list. I'd like to hear from both of you on this one. How do you decide what part of the campus will be built next?
It's kind of an ongoing needs analysis. And so that's, again, why it's helpful to have, someone like Uncle Al co-lead a trip with you, because while you're doing a project, you may continue your ongoing needs analysis with some of the time that you're on site. And you're trying to figure out, if they need, if they need 2 more classrooms, or if they need, a science lab, what's the demand right now? What's the next problem that we can solve? In Uganda, we built some extra classrooms, and then the government came in and said, you can't populate those classrooms until you put more bathrooms in, which kind of had changed our long-term construction plan. But I will say, this school was off the radar, and now it's on the radar. It means they're paying attention to education in that area. So that was actually kind of a good thing for us to see the government take notice there. But again, yeah, sometimes it's dictated to us what you have to build next to continue the project. And sometimes it comes through that needs analysis process.
It's kind of fun to, we go there and we make a plan or a guide to what we want to do, but it's a go with the flow mentality. We change on the fly from year to year, what really is needed, what is prioritized by the community and the school and the students, and it changes and we change with it.
Very cool. Uncle Al, your most recent BCTV trip with the team was to India for a project, not an evaluation. And my understanding is that you spent more time shaking hands than moving bricks. Talk to me about that aspect of the project. What was gained by those meetings or visits, and did you feel safe going to some of those places?
Well, it's taken me a few years to understand that there's definitely a time to move bricks and there's definitely a time to shake some hands. Both are important to build the trust and relationships within the community and with our partners. Just our being there, our presence on site often reinforces the credibility of our local partners, and hopefully we're planting seeds for the future. Have I felt safe? Yeah, pretty much by the time we get done with our site eval and we have a team on the ground, I feel safe.
Now, Grant, that was the last trip for 2020, right? The one that we're talking about?
Yeah, just before the border closed.
Tell me a little bit about how BCTV has kept going in 2020, because I found it interesting that you all have been able to really keep the momentum going within these communities. And I watch you on the Facebook and I watch you on the LinkedIn, but you've really done a great job keeping things going. Talk to me a little bit about 2020.
Well, we have, 2020 is that year that you kind of want to forget, but we had some really amazing things happen in 2020. And it also was a validating year for a lot of the things that we put into place. We talk about sustainability, we talk about long-term, and that's one of those things that you can really only see in action when you take your hands off of it. And we were forced to take our hands off of the projects and the work in 2020, and really the local community activists and the communities determined what they were going to do to keep things moving forward. And so from our end, the generosity of donors and supporters was the financial mechanism, because, if you think about the economic engine of BTCV, volunteers are a big part of it. We call them volunteer donors because they donate money like Uncle Al to participate on these projects, but then they support the construction, they support the new desk, all those things. So we were able, because of the long-term planning, because we already knew what was next through that process of needs analysis and long-term planning, what's the next step for us? We were able to finance the projects and get good communication from the community partners. And, I love Andy Stanley. He said, you can't be certain of anything right now, but you can communicate about everything right now. And so in 2020, we just did our best to communicate. We wanted to keep people engaged. It's a big reason we started doing changer chats, because when I can't go on a trip with you, I still want to make sure that you know what's going on with your dollars, and we want you to hear the story.
Mm-hmm. You did a great job with that this year. The book coming out, I hope everybody gets that book. It was fantastic, and it was fantastic. That was a great book.
Some of those stories, like the Kampala Market, Hand Delivered Hope, is a great book for the inside scoop.
Yeah, it was good. So on that, I want to know, what was the most humorous or memorable thing from a first-time site evaluation? Let's leave the audience with something really good, something that they would not know. I know there's some things that are off limits, but let's talk about some of the funny things that happened. Al, can you tell me some fun stories?
Well, Grant and I have traveled a lot, and we have chosen that there's a lot of things that we will take to our grave. But there's so many to choose from, but I always talk about the political rally that we ended up at. It was in Uganda. It was part rally. It was part family reunion. It was part rock concert and a little bit of county fair thrown in there.
Yep.
I'm not sure, but I think that evening Grant made the 10 o'clock news. So, but that's another story for another time.
Yeah, we were in the car.
I'll let Grant throw his in.
We were in the car with our partner, and we kept trying to figure out where we were going because we'd wrapped up most of the evaluation, and he was taking us to show us off, I think, because we showed up and there was probably 1,000 people in the field, and it was for a political rally. But they got us out of the car and they took us up and had to shake hands with the politician that was there and sat us right up front. And we were in t-shirts and blue jeans, so we didn't see this coming, but it was certainly unique. And we just hope that it was the guy that we were shaking hands with on television was a good guy.
Oh my goodness. Well, guys, this has been fantastic. I really appreciated this time and really found it fascinating to learn more about Be the Change volunteers. Uncle Al, great to get to know you. Glad that you are partnering up with my baby brother and keeping him safe when he travels. Grant, great work.
We hope you enjoyed this Changer Chat, and we hope you will visit us online at btcv.us. If you like the Changer Chat sessions and want to hear more, let us know with your financial support of our mission so that more students can have the opportunity for education worldwide. Thank you, and be the change.